So if you're a health and safety manager, then you definitely have a risk register. But trust me, your risk register is not as good as this. This is the Power BI version, and it does a lot of things. There are a lot of dashboards that you can actually see here. So we have dashboard on risk profile, we have dashboard on risk matrix, we have a dashboard on risk level or risk levels, we have a dashboard on risk controls. We have brought the risk register right in here, and then we have the risk control tracker as well. This is more like an action tracker, which you can actually see whose controls are still open or whose action are still closed and open, all of that. But this is just visualization using Power BI. The most important thing is to go back to the database, and that is the Excel file. Now we've introduced some new changes just because we are creating, or we've created a Power BI model, and for that reason we want to keep the names consistent and create some calculations that's going to help us to generate the report that we've generated in Power BI. All right, so let's go back to the approved list. Now within the approved list, the changes that we introduced was the fact that we introduced a responsible persons column. Basically, this is a list of responsible persons by their names or by just job positions, which you're going to use in the risk register and the risk control tracker. And again, we have the revision frequency. So we believe that risk register is a living document that must be updated regularly for any changes in the factors of risk assessment, whether new hazard, new employee, new equipment, new location, or any conditions that can change. You need to make sure you have a frequency for revision and for review of the document. So we've provided them here where, the duration for review is stated. Now that has been integrated in the register, so that automatically provides the next revision date. Now let's just take our time and go to the initial risk analysis. That's the first revision we did, in the sense that we put those values, those numbers right by it, so that at a glance you can know what the calculation is. That the very likelihood is 4, the insignificant is 1, and it's giving us a rating of 4. But then again, we also revised the naming, because this was there as likelihoods, consequent rating, and risk level, but we actually qualified it with initial risk analysis. For that reason, we have initial likelihood, initial consequence, initial risk rating. And we have the residual risk analysis, right? We qualified it properly so that everybody knows that this is a risk analysis that we've done after mitigation, and for that reason, it helps us estimate the residual risk level. Now, what is a residual risk? That is a risk level after mitigation. After all mitigations have been put in place, the risk level that is acceptable within the organization is the residual risk. And that is the risk that we are all seeking to keep within our organization. So we want to control all the hazards. So based on this template, you have to, approve and set a date that was updated, and then the frequency for revision, and that's going to set the next revision date. The dates will be tracked automatically. Revision status is going to be tracked automatically, right, as overdue, due soon, or in date. And then when we go to the risk control tracker, we also try to make sure that the controls that are pending, you can actually assign it to somebody. So you can actually assign it to a name, and then the status will be updated once progress updates have been input and the number of controls completed is updated, and that's going to automatically change it. So we introduce a drop down list basically, and this is taking a source from the approved list. And in the risk register as well, the approved person is based on a drop down list. So that's the changes we did. Now this thing stays the same, the dashboard is the same, the control pending, all are the same. Now this template is basically looking at the risk control level. All right, how many mitigations, how many have been implemented, what is the score across different risk IDs and activities, and what are the pending controls for various activities and the risk IDs and all of that. That's pretty much it. However, when you go on the Power BI model, then it's a lot more. So first and foremost, you are bringing the risk matrix online in Power BI, because Power BI can actually publish it within your company to the web, on SharePoint. We want people to know what the risk matrix is about. We all know the risk matrix is a qualitative risk assessment methodology based on combination of likelihood and severity. And for that reason, we have the risk rating over here. The maximum of the risk rating is 25. The minimum is 1. Now, for us to compare risk levels or have a risk scoring criteria, which helps us to make proper decision, we need to be able to convert all of this to percentages. So we can actually estimate percentage risk levels based on this scoring criteria. The maximum is 25. The minimum is 1. At any given point, there's a risk level. The risk level divided by the maximum will give us the score. Basically we multiply by 100 and we get a score. So it then means that the higher the score, the higher the risk level, the lower the score, the lower the risk level. So if you have a risk level of 25 divided by the maximum, which is 25, you have a risk level of 100%, and that is the maximum. Now take note that within this risk level or this range, there is a minimum value, which is the minimum threshold. So within the risk ratings, the minimum threshold for extreme, which we've defined here, right? The extreme is here, the high, the medium, the low. The minimum threshold is a 15. Once you get to 15, every risk level within this range is extreme. So 15 divided by 25, right? If I do the calculation, divided by 25, we have 60, 0.6 times 100, that's 60%. So if you have a risk score equal to or greater than 60%, you are within the extreme. So these minimum values were used to set our threshold values for estimating which range is risk rating in terms of scoring, and for that reason it could be a high, medium, low, or extreme. Now take note that this is a bit dynamic. Once you click on this, it's going to change, the risk matrix is going to change. You click on this, it's going to change. You click on the level, the risk level is going to change. So we made it dynamic as well. Move on to the second dashboard. That's a risk overview dashboard. Now this dashboard is very, very insightful. We are telling you the number of risk IDs. Now all the risk assessments, we are capturing them as unique IDs within the template. Let's go back to the risk register. We have a total of about 15 risk IDs because we just want to make sure we are counting the number of occurrences within the row. And then though we have hazards lambed up within the cell, we could have unwanted event or risk also lambed up within a cell. We cannot really be counting all of these. So we're just looking at each row as a unique risk. And that is how we sort of simplify the analysis based on this condition that each row is a risk. So this risk ID is what we are counting here. How many risk categories do we have? That is 2, because the risk categories, we have it in our approved list as about 3 of them. But within the register, we've actually captured only 2. Environment and safety, health is not part. So that's what we have here, 2 risk categories. And then we have the number of controls. How many controls are within the, the risk control tracker? We have about 100. What is the residual risk? So we have a residual risk. So this is like overall residual risk. This residual risk has been distributed across each risk ID. So each risk ID, there's the initial risk level, there's the residual risk level. The difference between the two will give us the percentage to which we reduce the risk, and the remainder is a residual risk. So we have a tooltip that gives us a lot more insight for each risk ID. So once you put a cursor on it, it's going to tell us the risk score is 80%. What accounts for the 80%? You can see it right in there. The initial was 25, the residual was 20. And for that reason, there was a difference. There was a reduction of only 20%. So the score is 80%. Where does the score fall? The score falls within the threshold of extreme because it exceeds the minimum threshold, which is 60%. And for that reason, the risk level is unacceptable right within it. You can see the priority action is there. It's telling us it's unacceptable. So we have various description for each risk ID. So we come to the low, telling us that the risk ID is there. We see it. The risk score is 4%. That 4% is within the threshold of the low risk. Now take note, 1 is the minimum of the low risk. If you come here, 1 is the minimum of the low risk. So 1 divided by 25 is 4%. The threshold is all the way from here to the 3. All right, once it's within this threshold, it is within the low category. For example, 8 is within the low. So the low risk is greater than or equal to 4%. 8% is within that range. Now, if you go to the next range, which is like medium, 16% is greater than or equal to 16%, which is the minimum threshold for medium risk. So 20% is within the minimum threshold. 40% has exceeded beyond the minimum threshold for medium. Now it has entered into the high risk. The high risk starts from 40%. So that's basically the scoring criteria we use to normalize the risk level so that you can actually compare them. All right, so let's quickly move over here. We have the distribution of the risk levels. We're comparing the residual and the initial risk. The goal is that you want to have a lot of greens, but this one tells us that we have one outlier, which is the RID 011, which is 80%, and that's what we have here. And the rest are all sort of medium, high, and low. All right. Now this section is for risk control tracker. Basically, the risk control score. How many controls were identified? How many were implemented? And what is the score? That's what we have. We've distributed it. Now you can actually draw up and down. Look at for safety, for environment. You can come down to look at department for risk ID. You can also, this one also, you can actually go up to look at department. You can look at for safety and environment. You can actually come down like this. Okay, so let's move on to the next. And that is basically the risk profile analysis. We want to understand the various activities, the risk categories, what's the initial rating, the residual rating, the difference, the initial score, what is the percentage rating difference, that is the reduction, the percentage risk reduction, and then what is the residual risk score, basically. So this is dynamic. Let's try to see how dynamic this residual score is. We can actually select this very one, and you see is 4%. This 4% if you look at the tooltip, 4%, the initial risk level, the maximum of the initial risk level is 4, the maximum of the residual risk level is 1. For that reason, there's a reduction of 75%, and the risk level is greater than the threshold value, which is 4%. And for that reason, the risk level is acceptable. For this risk ID, you can see it right in there. But when we move on to this medium, the color changes. You put a tooltip on it. It tells us the initial risk was 12, the residual risk was 4. There's a reduction of 67%. That is above the minimum threshold of 16%. And for that reason, it's generally acceptable. So these colors actually vary from the various levels of risk, as you can see. All right, you can actually filter by risk ID like this to have a proper understanding of what the risk profile is. You can actually clear the filter like this. We move on to the next, which is the risk matrix. So this one we are looking at after we do the combination of likelihood and severity and gotten the rating. We look at the risk matrix itself. So we are looking at pre-mitigation. What was the risk rating looking like? Post-mitigation, what was the risk rating looking like? There's also another form of viewing it where we'll have the rating by the levels, right? So pre-mitigation risk matrix based on the levels, right? And again, we have the risk score here. So basically, if you click on any of the items, we have how the whole thing worked out. The mitigation was a medium risk, post-mitigation was a medium risk, pre-mitigation was 9, risk level was medium, it was 8, risk level was medium. The difference isn't much. And for that reason, when we put a tooltip on it, it's exactly what we have: 9 initial, 8 residual, only one difference, 11% reduction. Medium risk, because 32 is greater than or equal to 16%, is generally acceptable. So the priority action is that it's generally acceptable. So that's pretty much it. We can, click on it again to clear it. We move on to the next. This is a risk level analysis. So we move on to the rating. We are looking at the levels. Now over here, accounting how many times did we capture the likelihoods for various levels of likelihood? How many times did we capture consequence for various levels of consequence? How many risk ratings do we have for medium and all of that? This one is giving us at a glance the heat map for initial and then residual, percentage of medium, percentage of high, percentage of extreme, pre-mitigation, post-mitigation, percentage of medium, low, high, and extreme. You can tell that we had a lot of high percentage for extreme risk. We've been able to reduce it to 7%. But of course, there are some outliers. For that reason, we are having a residual score of 80%. Outlier, as we all know, is coming from one particular risk ID, and that is this risk ID of 11, RID 11. Okay. RID 11. So RID 11 is outlier. We can find it and try to understand what kind of activity is it. So RID 11, RID 00011, you can see here it's lifting lower marine riser pack using BOP gantry crane while in transit. That's a very high risk activity. The initial risk level was 25. That's the extreme, the highest within the risk matrix. The residual risk was 20. After mitigation, it's still 20. The difference of the risk rating is 5, -5. The initial score, the rating, which is 25, divided by the maximum, which is 25, is giving us 100% score. And then the reduction is 20%. The residual risk is 8%. That's exactly what we have there. So that's the most significant risk we have within our organization. So that's how can we have risk profile. You can tell what is the most significant risk. And then let's move on to the other, which is the risk levels, right? We are done with this one, risk control. So basically the number of controls, how many were identified, how many were implemented, is giving us a score as we have it here. The control level scoring has been applied to the various risk IDs. You can actually come up to the level of department, to the level of the safety and health or the higher category. You can do all of that. Then we have the risk, the closure. So how many times do we have open and close? We are estimating a closure score or a control closure rate. You can see it right here. The target is to make sure you're achieving 100%. Over here, the target is to achieve 100%, right? And then we move on to the risk register. So a risk register is supposed to be a living document. And for that reason, everybody should be able to see it and know what applies to them, share the knowledge with their team, make sure that they are giving feedback for improvement of the risk register by advice on any additional risk, any additional hazard that you need to keep updating. So basically, there's a risk register that we have in here. Each department can filter out to know what applies to them. Then again, we have the risk control tracker. So basically, more like an action tracker, the number of mitigations, how many controls have been identified, what is pending controls, who is responsible, progress update that has been provided within the Excel template. So it's going to populate here for everybody to see, and the action status. The goal is that you want to close all the controls, and then the scoring will be done automatically. So that is how exciting this template is. In case you're interested, all you need to just come to getting started. Make sure you download the Power BI desktop on your computer so you can be able to open the file when you purchase this. But if you want to purchase, just click here and then come to the website. It's going to bring you here. All right, so basically you come all the way down and you purchase this. Right, it's just $99, which is a very good deal. The Excel is $19, but this one is a lot of amazing features, and I believe that you're going to find this template very, very useful for your top management review meetings, a lot of interesting things that you do to make your health and safety job much easier. All right, so thank you. I'm going to see you guys in another video. Bye for now.